When we think about violence prevention, there is no one program or approach that has got the academic research that says that it will always work when applied to any young person. Similar to dieting, there are different approaches that are promising, but there is no one single approach that can be used with any young person. For young people where violence is starting to emerge or it's starting to become a risk, there are 3 different programs that have been evaluated as having the greatest potential impact. I think the first is around sort of thinking skills that can be taught to young people, such as anger management. These approaches can be delivered within schools, but also within sort of youth settings and also for adults as well. These thinking skills programs that allow young people to manage their emotions, manage their anger, or put things in perspective, have a fairly strong evidence base and are generally appropriate for most young people. Alongside that, there's emerging research that parenting programs will have a positive impact, where parents, certainly parents of teenagers, can develop the skills, learn the techniques so that they can develop a sort of stronger bond and relationship with their child. And thirdly, it is mentoring programs that are seen to have some kind of value and impact. Now, a mentoring program is one where a young person is supported by an individual, where they meet regularly. That can be emotional support, that can be practical support, and it gives them someone that they can talk with about their thoughts and their emotions. Now, mentoring programs, the research tells us, generally work best when they're part of a long-term preventative approach. And by that, we sort of mean 12 months or more. When we think about young people and young adults who have become involved in violence, there are 2 particular approaches that research tells us work best. The first is a pulling levers approach. This is where there is a multi-agency collaboration that wraps around that person. It will involve the police, who will be providing a level of monitoring, surveillance and enforcement, but alongside that sit other services who will provide support or offer support to that individual. I think one of the features of a pulling levers approach is that it needs to be persistent. So the offer of support doesn't just happen once, but there's regular contact made with that young person, that young adult and their family that's offering that support, and it's going back, being persistent, trying again and again, with the aim that ultimately people will accept that support and look to change the behaviour that's happening in their lives. The second approach is around sort of mediation or restorative justice, where the perpetrator of violence would meet with their victim or hear from their victim about how that victim has been affected. It's an opportunity for people to talk about what happened and why and how it's affected them. This is a more challenging or complicated approach because it needs both the victim and the perpetrator of the violence to be willing and comfortable to meet and then to talk. And usually requires a skilled facilitator to be part of that whole process. So those are the programs or approaches that can be applied, but there's actually a role for any professional or individual when working with a young person. What we've learned from the research around sort of desistance theory, as in why people might stop committing crime or sort of certainly violent crime, is that at the heart of the approach is the relationship that we have with that young person. And the theory sort of defines that relationship being a strong and trusting relationship where the worker clearly believes in the capacity of that person to change. So it's not just a relationship, but there's some key factors within that. And what we know from learning about adverse childhood experiences is that young people have experienced trauma, and quite often young people who are involved in violence will have experienced trauma in their lives. Is that a traumatised child will find it difficult or more difficult to trust others around them. And that creates a challenge for the professional or the person wanting to support that young person. It might mean that they need to actually allow the young person to be in charge, to set some of the rules for when they're going to meet, for how long and what it is they might be talking about. And they might need to go at the pace of the young person, so they allow that young person to set the pace at which they try and sort of talk and build that relationship. And again, with this, you might need to be persistent, because a young person, if they don't trust you, might need you to come back again and again to try making contact until that relationship starts to emerge. I think once there is a relationship and that young person is willing to talk and to listen, the research tells us that it's a focus on the future that is most important. It's that young person being able to develop a sense of self-esteem, their own identity, their own brand, if you will. If a young person sees themselves as being positive or being able to have a positive impact on those around them, that's how they start to define themselves and their actions. Young people can, and often do, have a strong influence on their peers, on their family, and on their community. What the research tells us is that if we can find ways of highlighting the strengths and the positive impact that they can have on others, and we build on that and try and encourage that young person to think about what they can do well, that actually that will have far more of an impact than thinking about their past and thinking about what they have done. It's a future focus that is sort of critical to helping a young person to change and to do things differently. And we know that behaviour change is difficult. For anyone that's trying to give up smoking, they will know that it may take more than one attempt and that there will be relapses. And for any professional working with a young person or young adult, they need to be prepared for those relapses. It will not be a smooth journey from one particular form of behaviour to another. And so supporting that young person being prepared for sort of some of those setbacks is absolutely important if we actually want to help that young person change. I think alongside that is helping that young person to develop positive relationships with others. We've talked about parenting programs and that relationship with their parents. That will be important for that young person, as our role, our impact on that young person's life is likely to be short, it's likely to be limited, whereas their family is there for the long term. So helping a young person develop healthy relationships with others is absolutely critical if we want to help sustain that change. I think the final thing is actually finding activities that a young person can do that bring a sense of self-esteem and self-worth. Young people may want to go and work, and helping them find employment, or actually helping some young people get back into education is going to be critical in what we do. But it might be something such as sport, it might be finding things they're good at within the family home. They may be the only person that can work the laptop. Something like that, where they become the PC expert within their home, is finding those positives, the strengths in that young person's life and focusing on those. And I think those are probably the main things that we know from the research in terms of what works when supporting young people, helping them to change some of that behaviour and hopefully helping them move into a sort of stronger, safer future.